Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of TGI Kubernetes. I am your host, Joe Beda, and I am actually doing this from home today. So you'll notice that things are looking a little bit different here. Um, yeah, so let me give a quick intro. So TGI Kubernetes is a weekly live stream that we do. This is the former Heptio folks, now part of VMware. It's where we talk about what's happening in the world of Kubernetes and then go through and explore some technology. So today's episode, we're going to be exploring the work being done and the product from Pulumi, a friend of ours down the road here in Seattle. So let's see. And so out the gate, so we have some notes that you can actually help to contribute to, which would be great. And generally, we break things up where spend some time doing a review of what's going on, and then dig into the technology. But first, let me say hi. There's too many people for me to get everybody, but let's see. It was Bob from LA. He's plugging Scale, the Southern California Linux Expo. So there we go. Olav coming up in March 7 through 10 in Pasadena. Olav, Sridhar from DC. Olav's from Denmark. Christopher from Germany. Anna's from Boulder. You're going to laugh at me when I show you what's outside my window on the other side here. Rory's from Scotland. Suresh, Hamburg. Minnesota, again, going to laugh at me. Zoltz from Finland. Yes, going to laugh. So here, let me show you real quick. So I'm doing this from home because if you look out my window here, you can see that it's snowing. And Seattle, like, we're total wimps when it comes to snow. I grew up outside Chicago, which gets a ton of snow, super cold. Worked with a guy from that grew up in Siberia. We were comparing notes. He's like, yeah, Chicago's worse. But Seattle, we don't get enough snow, so we don't, invest in a lot of snow plows and equipment, and we have a lot of hills. And so what happens is when it snows, just everything goes to crap and the city shuts down. And so there's a good chance that if I was doing this from the Heptio offices downtown, I would not be able to make it home today. And so since I'm doing this from home, the dog may be barking, my wife may be coming in, so there may be some distractions. Be ready for that. All right, so let's go through. Let's see. I want to say hi to some more folks. Let's see, Mike is in New Jersey. Muhammad in Pakistan, welcome. Yeah, good evening / morning to you. What time is it? Like 12 hours off? It's like middle of the night. I'm impressed. Let's see, Martin in the Netherlands. Perko in Sweden. Ballard, which is just down the way. So yeah, Snowmageddon has begun. Yeah, Eric from Minnesota. Awesome. So we also have a couple of folks joining us. I think, did I see him on here? So we have Joe Duffy here, who's representing the Pulumi team. Mike also, Metro is also from Pulumi. So they can help us if we get stuck or if I'm doing something stupid. We'll be looking in the chat to see Joe and Mike, and we'll see if Alex is able to join us also. So that should be exciting. Yeah, there's Alex saying hi. And it's like, got the whole team, Luke and Levi, so everybody. Oh, and then Paris. Is that our Paris? Or is that a different Paris? Well, hello. All right, so let me get going here. So usually I start out, and so all these links are in the notes that we'll link to from the description. It's in the going to be checked into the TGIK repo. So if you want to find this stuff, you can do it that way. So and George helps who's helping out here. George and Duffy have helped to curate some of this stuff. So the first one is this interesting article. Actually, what happened? It's a slide deck. I don't know where it was presented. Looking at Kubernetes at CERN, which I think is really fascinating because early, and I haven't gone through all this yet, but it looks like there's a lot of really interesting data in here. And I wonder if there's a video of this getting presented. That'd be cool. But anyway, so this is from Ricardo at CERN. So early in my career, I actually did an internship at Fermilab outside of Chicago in Aurora, Illinois. And in their theoretical physics group where I was helping to improve some of their theoretical models. So it was not big data at the time, but so I have a soft spot in my heart for accelerators. Yeah, so that's what CERN looks like from the air. Next link is a video from Go to 2018. So this looks really interesting, talking about troubleshooting, debugging microservice in Kubernetes. So looks like a lot of good sort of troubleshooting tips, how to actually figure things out and dig deep into that, which looks really cool. Let's see. And then there's a bunch of stuff from FOSDEM. I wasn't there. I've never been, but everybody says that it's a great conference. So I need to find some time to go sometime and hang out and get some stuff done and, write some code. But some of the presentations here. So the first one is from our own Chris Nova. You all know and love Chris. So this was pretty much her starting with a title and then making a talk about it. It's like you can't have a clusterfuck without a cluster. But I think the title morphed a little bit here. But she's essentially looking at some of the embarrassing parts of the Kubernetes code base and some of the things that we're working on cleaning up, I mean. Oh, George said he found the YouTube video of the CERN talking. He's going to be adding it to the notes. Awesome. And then let's see. So there's another one around. This is from the folks who are driving Falco, which is a security auditing thing. I think we did a TGIK on that. So there's a talk here from Julio, which is great. Here's a story or a talk that from Seth that goes into Kubernetes secrets, the good, the bad, the ugly of going on here, how they've actually sort of evolved and improved over time. And this is something that Duffy, I believe, is going to try and do an episode around next week. So we have him signed up. So that should be fun. He's going to explore some of the different sort of solutions and pros and cons there. And I'm sure Duffy's going to be watching Seth's video here to get some tips and some pointers. And then finally, there's a talk here on Cilium, recent updates and overviews. And I think Chris did a TGIK and Cilium a while ago, and it'd be interesting to see sort of how things have changed since then. And so Cilium is a networking tool set underlay for Kubernetes and beyond that instead of using a pile of IP tables and such, uses eBPF, which is this really cool sort of like virtual machine evaluation in the Linux kernel, which is pretty cool. All right, so there, Joe says secret. Yeah, the worst name for a base64 blob ever. I think the idea was that these things are managed in a different way. But yeah, at some point though, like if you have the thing available to a workload and you can schedule a workload, then you pretty much at that point you can get the secret. So yeah. All right, so news here. So this is from the Heptio point of view. We're going through the sort of painful process in that just there's a lot of details to work through about figuring out how do we merge the stuff we were doing at Heptio and the stuff that's going on in VMware and create some new greatness out of it. And so along with that, we've been looking at our open source projects and trying to sort of bring those into the VMware fold. One of the things that happened here as part of this is that we've renamed Heptio Arc to Valero. And so part of the reasoning behind this, and this is so subtle, but it's like we're not calling these things like Heptio A and Heptio B anymore. We're just calling it Valero. And once you actually sort of remove the brand in front of it, all of a sudden, there's more room for confusion. And so there's other products and projects out there, related to backup called Arc. And so that really meant that we wanted to eliminate any chance of confusion there. And so Valero was the name. We actually had an issue where a bunch of people put some suggestions in there, including Arky McArcface, which I think would have been awesome. And then KSonnet, this is the other big update out of it. KSonnet is actually the first project that we did at Heptio. Alex, who's now at Pulumi, who's on the chat here, really blazed a trail with this. We learned a lot, we experimented a lot, and I think what we looked at is KSonnet hadn't caught on in the way that we had hoped it would, and we had to choose where we were going to spend our time. And we're seeing that this is a hard problem. There's a lot of innovation in this space. And so, I think it was just like we didn't think we had the people or the perspective to bring to bear on this right now. I still think we have some unique ideas to bring to the world here, but it's going to have to come in a different timeline, in a different form. So Jeffrey from Mountain View, welcome. And then, yeah. So, all right. Sono Boy's continuing on, and so it's not getting a name change, and we're looking at continuing to build and expand on that. And then contouring gimbal. And usually when we talk about these things, we talk them as in pair. They are different projects, but they're super complementary. We're continuing to invest in these. We have some of our commercial Heptio customers that are using these things, and so we're starting to get some more contributions, some more beyond just the original sponsor of this, which was Yahoo Japan through their American subsidiary. So a lot of interesting stuff going on here, and we're continuing to invest in that. So all right, so that's kind of a little long-winded there. All right, we got Marco from Ghent. Where's Ghent? Ghent. I'm not sure. Where is that? Jason from Boulder. Christian from Madrid. All right, so Saeed, so here's the deal with JSONet. We are going to be sunsetting it. It was an independent entity. It existed on its own. If there are a set of folks who are really interested in picking it up, that's definitely something that we can talk about. We don't want to leave anybody high and dry, but it's one of those things where we just don't have the energy to continue to invest in it moving forward. So there's a ton of other interesting projects out there that sort of hit at this space, including Pulumi that we're going to be looking at today. All right, and so with that, the last thing I want to highlight is there's this great blog post from the Argo folks. They are now part of Intuit. They were purchased a little while ago, the company that drove Argo, and they did a great overview of the different configuration options that are focused just on Kubernetes, including Helm, Customize, which is an interesting no templating, but a bunch of overlays type of thing. Okay, George says Ghent is close to Brussels. Hopefully, I'm going to visit next year when we invite you to config management camp. All right, there we go. And then George is posting the URL to the live notes there again. So this goes some of the pros and cons, what these things are good at from these folks' point of view. JSONet is the language that KSONet used. There's a whole bunch of folks who are doing stuff with JSONet. And similar to KSONet, and then there's KSONet itself and other derivatives talking about how the fact that we're sunsetting it, but there's a bunch of other other projects that are actually building on JSONet. So I think there's a lot of interesting innovation going on in that space. And then there's replicated ship, which is another management thing. This is something that is on my list of things that I want to go into and actually start exploring. So I want to do a TGIK on this sometime in the future. And then Helm 3. So Helm is, I think we've talked about this before, Helm 3. I think I heard that there was going to be an alpha soon. There's work going on. It's going to be, instead of Tiller, this stuff is going to move a lot to work client side, and they're integrating Lua for scripting of the thing, which is interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about Lua there, but we'll have to see how it pans out. All right, so with that, I'm going to, any questions, anything I missed, anything big news in the community that you think I should talk about here? I got to give some time for the delay here. And I'm watching cars outside my window here go down. At some point, they're going to start slipping, and I'm going to turn the camera around and we'll watch them slip down. All right. Yeah, for those who joined late, we're having a huge snowstorm here in Seattle, which is freaking everybody out. And so I have a front seat view to see all the snow start to accumulate. All right, well, let's get going. All right, so here's the HackMD where folks can take notes. As we get started here, I have a couple of things. I have a cluster up and running in AWS that we can use, but then Joe and the team at Pulumi put together some. So why implementing a new scripting language? Well, I mean, Lua is well used across a whole bunch of different projects and a bunch of different domains. It's actually a really popular sort of embeddable language. I'm just not sure how many people in this domain actually know it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. I also have my GCP account set up, a project set up for TGIK that we can use too. And the Pulumi folks were put together some tutorials that sort of really shows the breadth of what Pulumi does. And so we're going to try and work through those. And you'll see that, let's see. So the first thing is that there's a Pulumi, using Pulumi with Kubernetes. tutorial here. So there's a lot of great documentation. And then the one that we're going to be working through is this a GKE hello world type of thing. So we'll start with this. We'll see how we go, and then we'll go off the rails and try and break stuff, because that's what we do. All right. So first of all, what is Pulumi? Now, I am not an expert. I think a lot of times I end up learning this stuff, in abstract, and the only chance I really get significant hands-on keyboard is, a lot of times through TGIK. So I come at this stuff with like a conceptual understanding of where some of this stuff fits in, but not a lot of practical on the ground experience. So that's one of the things that we'll learn together. Now, Pulumi is it's a startup here in Seattle. A friend of mine, Joe Duffy, is the CEO, and the right way to think about this is it's Terraform. But instead of fronting Terraform with a DSL, it's Terraform fronted with real languages, and I think that's really interesting, because I think, like, in this config space, there's this idea where you want things to start super simple, super declarative, but then inevitably things get complex, and as you build the tool set so that it adapts to that complexity, all of a sudden it becomes a real sort of full-fledged language. I think, if you're a computer scientist, you'll say it becomes Turing complete, which means that you can do anything with it, at least computationally. But as it becomes Turing complete, it becomes harder to reason about, and all of a sudden you're missing a lot of the sort of support that you need for real Turing complete languages, and so that ends up, like, turning the cycle around where people are like, oh, this is too complex, let's simplify it again. And so there is a school of thought, and this is where Pulumi's coming from, is that skip that whole DSL, skip that march to complexity, and instead let's use real languages to be able to actually face this stuff. So it's like, instead of actually using a half-ass language, let's go through and actually try and build something with a real language. So let's see. Oh, and then Fernand says new stuff with K9SS. What is K9SS? Is this CLI to manage your clusters in style? So interesting. I'll have to check this out. Duffy, have you played with it? I haven't. We'll have to add that to the list of something to play with. Thanks for the pointer there. Yeah, very cool. All right. Yeah, so that's what Pulumi is, sort of in concept, and so the set of languages that Pulumi deals with includes JavaScript. I think is a lot of the examples, but also Python, and what's the whole list, Joe? It's like Python, C#, Go. I don't know. I mean, like, but they have a sort of a framework where they can extend that over time, and then it works not just against Kubernetes, but against other cloud infrastructure. And so that's why. So Go, okay, and so that's why the example that we're going to go through is not just like, hey, I have a cluster, how do I deploy apps to it? It's going to be, how do I actually create a cluster using GKE and deploy it all in one framework? So I think that's really interesting. Oh, and then Alex saying, so TypeScript, JavaScript, Python, and Go, with C# being community supported. So that's the language list right now. And then working on a new approach to multi-languages that'll unlock more support. So very cool. And some good conversation going on there. All right, so install Pulumi. I haven't done this yet. So we're on Mac OS, and we can do Homebrew. So let's just do that. Boom. Can you read this? Here, yeah, I had, oh, you're seeing some of my stuff there. Okay, so we have that going on. Let's see. And I'm using a keyboard that I like. I have a different keyboard at home than at work, so it's really easy for me to get confused. This is like a really small sort of compact keyboard, so it's really pretty. Here, let me show you. Right? But it means that, like, I'm always switching between different keyboards and confusing myself, so I need to fix that somehow. All right, so let's see. So, all right. So we are now. What the hell are you doing, Homebrew? Brew cleanup has not been run for 30 days. Thank you. All right, we'll let that go for a while and we'll read through. Okay. Oh wait. Did it install? Okay, so yeah, cool. So we got that going. Um, let's see. So that step is done. Boom, check. Install Node.js version 6 or later. Why do I need that? Do I need that to? I probably need that to evaluate the TypeScript and stuff. Interesting. All right, so here's my first suggestion to the Pulumi folks. Um, it'd be cool if you package this stuff as Docker containers with sort of hermetic, and then the Pulumi command line could either use stuff natively or it could actually exec into Docker and set all the right options to mount the right file systems and credentials and stuff. And so that would actually be kind of cool. It might be harder to debug, but it might also be easier to deal with configuration issues because like my experience with Node and npm is that it's really easy to get a sort of a horked setup. So yeah, so that might be interesting. But I think I have npm node exit. Does it tell me the version? Maybe version 10. So I guess I already have that stuff done. So there we go. Google SDK, gcloud, I have that. All right, and I have that, and then I was wondering if I had to do this application default login. So what this is it creates credentials on disk that applications can use, so that it can act as you. Boom. So we went ahead and did that. I think it's also like there's also, and I haven't looked at this, but it looks like the login stuff. You could also set this stuff up so that it works over with a service account in GCP also. So that SDK is kind of nice. All right, so here we were here. All right, and then configure GCP service account key and download credentials. Okay. Note the service account key credential use must have the role GKE admin, container admin. All right, so let's figure out how we do this. Okay, the Pulumi Google Cloud Platform provider needs to be configured with Google credentials before it can do what it needs to do. And so I want to go into my credentials here and under, okay, so API and services, credentials. Let's see if we, on the next ring, select the JSON key. All right, this thing is loading. It's doing its thing. Oh, okay. Oh, I have to do one of those. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I get how this works. So either you do the gcloud login with the auth application default, which means it's going to be acting as you, right? It's going to be using my thing. Or if you want to set something up such that, like, hey, like I'm doing this in a CI/CD system, or like I'm doing something and then like, my buddy Duffy wants to do stuff too, we can actually share credentials in a scoped way using the service account. Okay. Let's see. Boom, boom. Okay. And then create a new Typescript project. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay. So I have to log in to Pulumi. Do I need to log into Pulumi? So I think one of the manage your Pulumi stacks by logging in. Is there a way that I can do this without logging in? I'm wondering. Because I like to really understand where the lines are. So no and yes, because I ask questions that are, okay, yeah. There's a way to run locally, but login is easiest. Well, I think one of the things I'd like to do the local thing, because I want to understand sort of where the lines are between what runs locally and what happens in the service. What do you guys think? Is it possible, or will I get totally stuck if I go ahead and do that? All right, I'm going to sign in. We'll do this. I can sign in with GitHub. Hopefully this won't flash anything wacky on the screen. I have way too many orgs that I have left over from random stuff. All right, so here I'm logged into Pulumi. All right, we can see stacks and stuff. So yeah, like I said, I think, I always like to understand sort of where the lines are between this stuff. All right, so Alex says, I think it's probably best to start using the service and then try local backend later. I don't know. All right, I'll take your all's word for it right now. So I have to go click on that. No tokens. All right, so what I'm going to do here is you're going to view my pretty face while I do this because I'm sure it'll flash a token on the screen. So it says new access token, give it a name. I'm going to give it a name. It gives me the token. Be sure to copy it because you won't see it again. I'm pasting that in. It looks like when I paste it, it doesn't actually show it. All right, so this is confusing. I'll show you. Let me switch back, and you guys can see what I'm seeing. Actually, give me a second here. So I have the thing in my buffer. All right, now I can switch back. Okay, yeah. So here's what I got. I did it. That showed me a screen where I could copy and paste that token. And then when I go to log in, it says, okay, enter your access token. I'm pasting it in right now, but it doesn't give me any feedback on the command line. So I think that ends up working. But that was a little bit confusing that it didn't give me any feedback because it's asking, okay, so now these are all defaults. Stack name, sure, dev. I don't know what I'm doing here, but there we go. And now it's actually doing a bunch of TypeScript node stuff. Okay, so Joe says, this just controls state and concurrency management. If you do a Pulumi login local, it'll store state locally, but similar to, okay, so this is like the Terraform state file. A lot of times, like you have your program, the program needs to know, well, I called this thing foo, but the cloud views it as A7387859. How do I actually keep that mapping? That's essentially what the Terraform state file is. And then Christian says, is it possible to store the state file somewhere else? Like, is that API open? And Alex says, yes, it is. Okay. So what it's saying, so it's saying, all right, or actually, let me go back and we'll look at this. Okay, so I lost my, okay, here we are. So we did this, enter project name, description, stack name. Select no when prompted to perform this update, else we'll be editing files. And okay, so I think update means, do I want to actually execute and apply this thing? And I do like all the colors here. This is fun. Okay. Okay, an error occurred, address the issue, and then blew me up to try again. Okay, the error was confirmation declined. That's not really an error. You asked me a question, I said no. But you viewed it as an error and exited with an error. Okay. Pulumi login local causes us to store the state files as JSON in a local file, and so okay. All right. So now, so what this did is this created it as a new directory, and we'll go through and load this puppy up in VS Code. Maybe. Where did it go? There we go. Let me get it on the right thing here. And so we have a TypeScript index file. So I'm a TypeScript noob. It's on my list of things I want to learn about. Okay, George says, when responding, it helps to make the response if you respond in a complete sentence. So, okay, because I'm confusing y'all. Okay, so I'm a TypeScript noob. And we have this index.typescript, which is just importing stuff. And I assume that this is just downloaded from NPM like everything else. And the whole node front end stuff really confuses me. Like, I don't know what it means for this to be an @ sign versus, is it just like namespacing of stuff, of packages? I think that's what the @ sign means. I don't know. I'm very confused. But in any case, so we have a bunch of the standard node stuff. We have pulumi.yaml, which is the stuff that we were prompted for as we were creating stuff. And then we have this tsconfig, which I think is the config file for the TypeScript compiler, saying, hey, I want to target ES6 because that's what Node speaks. All right. Oh, and then package.json doesn't have any like any fancy things that I run or anything like that. Okay, so it's really minimal TypeScript project is what it looks like. Okay, yeah. Okay, cool. And now we're gonna go back and these folks were nice enough to make this copy pasteable. All right, so the first thing we want to do is set the right GCP config variables. So set the project equal to TGI Kates. That's what I have, right? So maybe TGI Kates. There we go. Something got slow here. What's getting slow? Okay. Oh, this is just the GCP dashboard is freaking out on me. What's it doing? All right, we're gonna navigate someplace else because that credential stuff seems busted. We'll just go here. There we go. Okay. Okay. TGI Kates. So I go ahead and I do that. And then the next thing I want to do is set the zone that I want to work in. All right. So this is interesting because like I have to set this, but this is also in my configuration that I have. If I do gcloud config configurations, what do I have? Describe. So like what I have here is like I already have a zone and a region and a project that are part of the gcloud config, and I'm wondering if there's a way to actually get that out of there. All right, and so so Alex and Joe are educating me here on how packages work in npm. The @ sign in front of it says that you're talking about a namespace. Because apparently when npm was created, I'm guessing everything was flat, and then they needed to introduce this idea of like, well, maybe we have too many packages, we needed this namespacey thing, and they introduced that later. That's what I'm guessing happened. All right, don't take my word for it though. Okay, create a new file named config.ts and insert the following content. So we'll go ahead and we'll do this. Config. I'll actually save this as config.ts, and then paste this in there. All right, and what we're doing is import star as Pulumi from Pulumi, import config from Pulumi. All right, so we're importing all this stuff. Why do we have both? That is confusing to me. Is that right? So I guess now I create a new config from there, and then let's see. And then these are my parameters. So I have config. So, okay, so Pulumi has an ID of config itself. There's a node count parameter that I'm setting that'll default to 2. The machine type is an N1 standard 1. The minimum master version is latest, and the node version is latest. So these are sort of like the things that we want to do. Okay, Alex is saying we don't need the first one here. We can go ahead and get rid of that. Okay, so this should work. All right, and now open the existing index.ts and replace the contents with the following. All right. Ooh, okay. So we're gonna. All right, if you hear like there's a shutter noise, I actually have a camera right next to me that's taking a time lapse. It's taking a photo every 30 seconds so that we can watch the snow accumulate. That should be fun. All right. Let's see. Config is like a per stack bag of state. So yeah, so it's essentially the incoming parameters. And then we also have encrypted config, so you can pass secrets in. So that's kind of cool. I'd love to learn more about that. And then Bradley's like you can do gcloud config get project, get value project gets the active project in the region similarly. Yeah, so I know there's ways to read that out of gcloud, so that might be interesting. Okay, let's try and figure out what's going on here. So we have a name called hello world because GCP lets you name things. And then this is the interesting thing here. So we're importing GCP in, and then import cluster config from config. So that actually pull it in from here. So we're pulling this in here. And so what you have here is Pulumi has a object model, a programmable object model for all the different cloud resources that you'd want to be able to create regardless of whether those things be Kubernetes objects or EC2 or GCP or what have you. Which is why I think that sort of Terraform, but with a real language, really resonates. Now, one of the things is that the Kubernetes support in Terraform is, my understanding, not great. And so I know the Pulumi folks, Alex specifically, put a lot of time and effort in terms of creating a really nice experience for Kubernetes config in Pulumi that goes beyond sort of the Terraform config. All right, so create a GKE cluster. So we're bringing some stuff in here. And then for each of the machines that we launch up, we want to give them some OAuth scopes for doing compute, read-only, write, monitoring. Okay, very cool. And then there's a cluster config node machine type. This is the so this is the standard config here. Now, when I do this, the question is that if I do const cluster2 equals new GCP dot, I don't have the, is there like, how do I get Typescript completion going on? Am I missing like, yes, okay, so Alex is saying that we have explicit GCP region parameters because it's nice to have per app settings. I agree, but it would be nice if you sort of bootstrap those or default to whatever your config is. So why am I not, could not find module, blah, blah, blah. So for some reason, I'm not getting completion here. This is, okay, it says can't find the modules. What am I doing wrong? This is me being a dummy when it comes to this stuff. Okay, back to the tutorials. Okay, oh, I see. Okay, so we're doing this. I'll stop going off script here. Oh, you have to add the dependencies. Okay, so yes, this is like, how do you add the dependencies? So now if we go through and if I do, no, I don't want to pay 64 lines at the prompt. That would be bad. How did I end up with, there we go. We'll copy that. So now we're actually going to do this. And this will install the dependencies we need here. And if I know my node, and I do not, if I go and look at package.json, what we'll see here is that we now have Kubernetes and GCP are some dependencies because we explicitly said, hey, do those things. Here's, all right, Pulumi has YAML. When we ran those commands, it created pulumi.dev.yaml, and I assume that there's like sort of an inheritance sort of implication here where dev is merged with pulumi.yaml. That's what I'm assuming goes on there. Okay, cool. So now if we go to index now, okay, we got no more red squigglies. So now we can go const cluster2 equals new GCP dot container dot cluster. And now, so this is, okay, so this is interesting. So now I can call this like foo. And then the args here are GCP container cluster args. But knowing that this is, I guess, okay, this is the magic of Typescript is I actually have, lots of help here in terms of filling this stuff out. Because this is one of the things that I'm wondering about is the experience when you're writing this stuff. One of the hard things is that, like, this is just a bag of values. And how do you know what bag of values to actually do there? Like, do you have to go and, like, if we go back to the browser and I go to, like, Pulumi and I go to docs, like, do we actually have, like, if I look at GCP, like, I'm wondering, like, yeah, it looks like they did some real good work in terms of helping to create the right experience. So there's some cool examples going on here. And then, and here's cluster args. So I'm like, what can I put there? And so here's the things that I can put in cluster args. So my guess is that a lot of this is derived from the from Typescript itself, I'm guessing. So there's a lot of things that I could actually put in here that then are passed in. So a lot of, I think, the value, okay, I can press F12. You're assuming that I know how to press, okay, so Alex is saying you can press F12 for docs, and he's assuming that I know how to actually do that on this keyboard, but let's see if I can figure that out. I think it's this key and this key. Look at that. Okay, so that actually takes us to where we are, and we see the declaration or the TypeScript sort of stuff on here. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, so a lot of the value that Pulumi is bringing here is that they're taking all of this schema of how I configure all these things. They're rationalizing it across cloud providers, and then they're providing sort of like friendly wrapping around this so that you have good, consistent documentation. You get things like the IntelliSense and things like VS Code so that you're not like looking at like 37 different tabs to figure out what you're actually doing. So that's actually pretty cool. All right, so now I go through and I do this and then export the cluster name. Why do I... Okay. This is one of the things that confuses me is that like there's like 12 different standards for how JavaScript does modules, but I guess TypeScript actually helps to constrain it. So we're going to export the cluster name and then manufacture a JKE style kubeconfig. Note that this is slightly different because the way GKE requires gcloud to be in the picture for cluster auth rather than using the client cert key directly. All right, so what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be ginning up a one of these where, all right, so let's see if we can decode what's going on here. Pulumi.all, so it says, okay, across all of these, the name, the endpoint, master auth, apply, name, endpoint, okay, all right, so the context is used a bunch of different places so that we're just caching that here. That's comprised of the project, the zone, and the name. These are global. Name is, oh, it says apply these, and then they get mapped to these things. And then I'm going to output this text string, and I'm going to save that as a variable. And so this is where just doing the kube config stuff as it goes. So this is one of those things, and I'm sure that they're thinking about this, is that there's going to be a bunch of sort of boilerplate that's not part of the API, but is sort of part of the sort of larger tooling. And so having some sort of like fellow traveler, helper, utility types of things here would be really, really useful. Let's see. Values like cluster.endpoint are only available after initialization. Pulumi.all and Pulumi. Okay, so this is the interesting thing that's going on here, is that I don't know what cluster endpoint is going to be until I actually launch the thing. And so there's this duality when this TypeScript program runs, where on the one hand, I'm going to run it once and actually generate a bunch of actions that'll like do stuff in the cloud. But then once some of those things become available to me, I want to be able to do more stuff. And so this implicitly, I assume, creates a dependency graph that says that when these things are available, and there's probably some metadata of like whether these values are initialized and what produces them. When these things are available, then I want to execute this stuff. And so that means in the meantime, kubeconfig is actually when we first execute it, saying, well, this is a sort of a promise that I'm going to be able to get something from this once these other things in the graph become available. I think that's what's going on here. So Pulumi guys, so here's the thing. Joe, is Mr. Programming Languages, so this stuff all comes naturally for him. But yeah. All right, and then similarly, we have create a Kubernetes provider instance that uses our cluster from above. And so this is actually, okay, this is fascinating because here we were using this as all GCP. Once we get down here, now we're actually talking about Kubernetes world. And so this could just as easily be a kube config that we're taking from someplace else, or this could just as easily be this could just easily be like an EKS instance or something like that. And so once we get to this point, we're in Kubernetes land, we're not in GCP land anymore. All right, so Alex says, yeah, you can think of a Pulumi program as generating a graph of resource operations that are executed by the engine. Okay. All right, so I think we've gone through and we've looked at this. I'm moving very slowly through your tutorial here, folks. All right, so now we want to go through and deploy the changes. So we're going to do Pulumi up. The up sub command shows a preview of the resources that will be created and prompts you running it will do this. So I think, so here's my question. The set of resources that we want to create is not deterministic because actually we might say, you know, hey, if I go through like I could do something, I assume, and tell me if I'm wrong here, where I could say, you know, if the endpoint, if I hash it and it's even, then I'm going to do one thing, and if I hash it and it's odd, I'm going to do other things, like, you know. And so my guess is that when I do Pulumi up, it's a best guess of the initial resources to be created, but is it possible that I can actually create new resources based on the state or the sort of results of the resources that I created before? Is that graph dynamic during execution, or is the graph fixed when you execute the program? So that's a question for Alex and Joe. But in any case, I think in this particular case, we're fixed. So if I do Pulumi up, we're going to preview saying, hey, I'm going to create a stack. And then all right, so Alex says, yeah, you can think, okay, so Alex says you can create resources in the apply, but we actively discourage it because it makes the plan unreliable. Yeah, because I said do a hash, but other people might do random stuff, or if it's a Tuesday or whatever, which means that every time you execute it, you're going to get a different result. So fairly rare in practice to be able to do that stuff. Okay, so I'm asking the hard questions here. Okay, so this is the best guess of the initial graph. There could be other stuff that get created, but we're not going to see them. And so we have a stack that's called Hello World Dev. Where does the stack come from? Let me see if I can map that to our code here. So I don't see the stack anywhere. And so the stack, I think, is implied based on this Pulumi.yaml. Okay, so this is GKE Hello World, and then we're doing the dev variant of it. And so there's a mashing together, and it knows how somehow it just does a dash in there between to be able to actually create that name that ends up being the container here. And I bet you if I do Pulumi help, can I actually specify config to use during, that's a string array. Where do I specify which stack I want? Oh, stack -s. So if I do up foo, what it's going to say, hey, the stack doesn't exist. Do you want to create it? And then that, like, let's say yes. We're going to do that. And so now it did that. And so now we called foo, and this created, I assume, let me close the node modules. If I reload this. Okay, so where does the fact that I have foo get recorded anywhere? All right, I'm off script. I'm going to stop it. Okay. All right, we'll just do Pulumi up. Okay. Stack. Okay, so Alex says the stack is just a collection of resources. It's a Pulumi construct, and the Pulumi.dev.yaml is a stack description. So those files, the YAML files, only store. Okay, but if I go through and I guess that gets staved. Oh, if I go here. Oh, I see. Okay, so that gets so when I create a stack, it gets staved into the state file, and so that's why I see here. Okay, here's that stack that I created when I did that. Can I delete the stack? How do I delete the stack? Settings. Oh, I can do that. Okay. Oh, interesting. So the stacks are, there's a global namespace for the stacks then. Oh no, this is under GKE Hello World Foo. But if I'm doing it, okay, so this is interesting. So there's context spread everywhere. So if I go here and I do Pulumi and I run this command that I was given here, and I do this, it's going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. But then if I do this and I remove it, it's actually importing some of that from there. So this should actually say you have to execute this from the directory that actually has the context for that. So I'll go ahead and delete that. Oh. All right, we've done that. And now it's like, we don't know what you're talking about there. And there we go. Okay, cool. Sorry, I'm going totally off script. Oh, George has to take off for the day. Thank you, George. Thanks for all your help. Thank you very much. All right, and so now I have to switch back now. So I have to do Pulumi. So somewhere in here, there's this idea of the current stack that I'm operating with. Where is that stored? Because I don't see that here. Is that actually... Do I have like a .pulumi somewhere? Oh, look at that. I have temp workspaces. So it's probably stored somewhere in there. All right, I'm gonna stop going off script. Yeah. Okay, we'll select back there. Okay, now we're back to the script here. Now we're doing Pulumi up. Do I want to create it? Yes. This will go through and create GKE it's going to create the cluster, and then it's going to create the Kubernetes provider, which is, I guess, the stuff that is Pulumi is sort of like synthetic things, right? These are not reflected into the cloud anywhere. They're just reflected into the state file. So now this is going ahead and creating the cluster. So now if I go here, and if I go, and I bet you if I look at Kubernetes engine clusters, look at that. We're creating it. It's called Hello World -08DAC3A. Where did the 08DAC3A come from, I wonder? So this is interesting. We'll see this a lot. So let's see. So this is so when we were doing GCE the first time, we were faced with a decision, and that decision was, do we let people name things? Because when you create a VM in GCE, you can give it a name, and that's actually kind of awesome because we then take that name because we know that name is unique, and we do things like reflect it into DNS and set it as the host name. So we can do a lot of really interesting stuff with the default name there. But it creates a bunch of problems. It creates a bunch of problems because, first of all, we made the mistake and we made this thing global, and we should have made it per region or per zone. That, I think, got fixed over time. And then the other problem there is that tools like Pulumi or Terraform, or at the time something like RightScale, they want to assume that they can always say, create me a new VM, and it'll actually be really predictable. And so our answer to folks who are like, well, I like the Amazon model where I say create VM and I get an opaque identifier that I know is unique back. And so naming is this sort of side concept with EC2. Our answer to them was, well, you can always just, create a unique name by appending a random string to it, and the chance of collision is actually very low. And so that looks like that's what Pulumi's doing here. All right. Yeah, and Alex says, yeah, so the random suffix is created by us, so you can instantiate the same app multiple times. You can also manually override this by providing a name in the args to the new cluster. Okay, so we could go through, and that being able to provide the name into new cluster is important if you want to adopt existing infrastructure. And I think anybody who's gone deep with Terraform knows that, if you manage your whole world with Terraform, it's one thing. But if you have existing stuff and you want to be able to adopt and start to sort of reason and do things with existing stuff, things get really, really messy pretty fast. But part of the state file that then gets stored into the Pulumi, it looks like it's up, that gets stored into the Pulumi service then would be the mapping of like, hey, the cluster name, let's see, so there's the config and the outputs. So if we look at resources, what we see here is that we have a thing called Hello World, and that they're storing, you guys are flashing auth stuff on the screen. That's bad news. Okay. They're then storing somewhere here the actual name of the thing. So that's where this mapping actually gets created, is that Hello World here gets mapped to this, that then gets mapped to the name of Kubernetes engine. So we are now up and running. Let's see what the command line looks like. All right, so this thing then went through and output the kube config just like that. Now what we should be able to do, well, let's actually, let me stay on the script. All right, so we've done that. Pulumi config set node count 3. All right, so let's go through and we'll actually sort of reset some stuff and see what happens. We'll set the node count to 3 and 1 standard 2. So we're going to spend some money, spend some of that VMware money, and then Pulumi up. All right, so now what it's saying here is that I'm going to have to replace the cluster. And so this means that what's differing is the initial node count, the name, and the config. And it looks like we don't know how to do an update of this. Now, because it's initial node count, I'm wondering, so this is one of those things that I think is kind of interesting. Is there a way to actually go in and start managing node pools and stuff like that? That might be interesting. Okay, so let's see. So Levi's saying, note that the overriding the name forces delete before replace for resources that require a unique name. This will take another 5 minutes. Recommend skipping. Yeah, okay. There are ways to change the node count in place, but you'd need to create node pools, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay. So that's an advanced move. We're not going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go through and I assume I can go back and just edit this stuff here and set this to 2 and 1. And now Pulumi is going to be smart enough to say, you're good. Do I want to perform this update? There's nothing to update. That's confusing. Okay, so there we go. Or what does it actually just try and reconcile and say, hey, things are out of whack? Okay. Access the Kubernetes cluster using Pulumi provider. So now we're going to actually do something with it. Okay, I wanted to do this real quick. So I wanted to actually say, how do I go through and I'm going to set kubeconfig equals to my current thing. Actually, using Q, you need to set up a kubeconfig file and download. We can leverage Pulumi stack to output the CLI as Pulumi facilitates. Or that downloads kubeconfig. So, oh, I see. This is what we need to do. Boom. Okay, so stack output kubeconfig says take that output and then actually do it. So one of the interesting things that I think is really fascinating here, real quick, is that if we go and if we look at this thing here, anything that we say is export actually shows up in the output list. So I could go through and do export, you know, Pulumi equals cool. And I believe, or what do I need to do? I need to do const, probably. Oh. I'm going to say, let's say Joe Duffy equals cool. We're going to do that because we don't have a variable named Joe Duffy yet. And now if I do Pulumi up, what does it say? Nothing's changed, but I'm going to do it anyway. And now we actually see here, it actually, oh, it shows me a delta the output, and it says Joe Duffy is cool. Have a great weekend, Anna. Okay, there we go. Export const Pulumi. And I wasn't able to do Pulumi because of our name conflict with the import. Okay, so then we can actually go through and get this. So in some ways, this feels a lot like CloudFormation with inputs and outputs, or at least does to me. So now we did, I think I ran this. And now I can do kube control get nodes, and I see it, and I'm now like totally in Kubernetes world. Kube control version. Cool. All right, we are up and running. All right. Okay, so cool. So now we have that. So let's actually do something with Pulumi here. And so access the Kubernetes cluster using Pulumi providers. And so now open the existing index.ts and append the following. So we're going to do some nginx stuff here. And Joe's no longer cool, so I'm going to take that off. Okay, so now we have this cluster provider that we can deal with, and we can create a Kubernetes namespace. And then we can export the namespace. All right, so this is a little wacky here because export the namespace name. So, okay, because we're creating this thing, the unique name of the resource. Oh, there's the dog. I think my wife's finally making it home, hopefully. Why do I need to do, what is m.name? Apply m. So what's going on here? This one's confusing me here. Okay, so Alex says this is being simplified. I think what this is saying here is that this may actually do the uniqueification here, and we want to do this, but we won't know the unique name until we actually execute the thing. Yeah. ns.metadata.name. Okay. And we're doing that on the cluster provider, and then we're going to create an nginx deployment. And then nginx deployment, we have some app labels, and so this looks very familiar to anybody that's done Kubernetes YAML before. So nothing too fancy here. But the deployment has 3 parameters. The name, the deployment, essentially YAML rendered as a JavaScript object, and then let's see, Pulumi custom resource options, which ends up being the provider that we want to then actually deploy this thing to. So okay, so the provider is sort of like extra things that we're doing here. Now that is just trying to like, so this is interesting because when I do gcp.container.cluster, this type here assumes that I'm getting the config from sort of ambient config here. But when it comes to Kubernetes, and I'm talking, there's like only one GCP that I'm talking to. But when I'm talking to Kubernetes, I might be talking to multiple Kubernetes clusters, and so I have to provide that as a parameter here. It's not sort of ambient global state, which is kind of interesting. And so Joe says, if you didn't specify a provider explicitly, by the way, it would use whatever cluster your client is configured to talk to. The cluster provider is there to target the JKE cluster. Kube control. Oh, so it'll actually go through and read does it read the kubeconfig environment variable? Does it actually maintain that standard? So that's something I'm wondering about. Okay, so then export the deployment state. So now we're actually going to go through, and again, we're doing this export so it shows up in our output. Now we're going to go through, we're going to create a load balancer here. And again, we're taking the YAML going on here. And I think one of the interesting things is that like this is super explicit here, but you could create your own helper library in TypeScript that actually sort of, calls out the stuff that you really care about. And I think this was something that we looked at with KSonnet, is that something like this is like super explicit, but that, over time, we imagine that there'll be a set of sort of helper libraries that help to encapsulate sort of the common objects here. And then we're exporting the service name and the public IP. All right. All right, let's go through and, all right, run Pulumi up, diff it, and then eventually we'll have nginx coming up. Well, I don't want to do nginx though. I want to do something different. I feel comfortable doing this. Let's go through. All right, so here's one question to y'all. Is there a way like this here? Can I go through and like, I guess I could always go through and like load up a YAML parser and parse YAML into this directly and then be able to import my existing YAML, right? Because that's going to be a common pattern. So instead of nginx lated, I want to quard. I'm going to do this because I've been working on this, and we're going to see if we can. And then so target port is HTTP. Okay, so cool. All right. All right, let me read through here. So Bradley Weston is saying, I've not used anything like this before. Can you describe the benefits over just using the GCP console? Also, if I check it into Git, would my team modify it for some automation? I'm not going to add nodes at 5 a.m. to cater for capacity. And Alex is saying, YAML, we actually have a config file thing. And then at the end of the tutorial, we have an experimentation section to import and convert YAML. Okay, so Bradley, I think, that's a really good question. I think if you just, this is sort of like all comes down to pets versus cattle. If all you want to do is create a couple of things, use the console. That's the way to go. I think part of the question is if you want to make this repeatable, if you want to be able to operate across multiple environments, then this essentially becomes the way you want to go. So I think one of the ways to think about this is that you could go through and launch a cluster in GCE from the gcloud command line. And if you wanted to do that in a repeatable way, you could wrap that in bash. This is like super bash scripting for all the cloud things. And so you could check it into Git and have a system that automatically, hey, whenever you check into Git, we apply it, we did the Pulumi up. Or you could have an explicit thing. It's really a building block to actually start building into that. Joe says many customers will use Git workflows for deployments. We'll augment PRs with the preview diffs automatically, and then when you merge, So this, this is compatible with sort of that whole idea around Git ops, but also looking at it not just for Kubernetes, but across sort of all your cloud infrastructure. All right, so let's do Pulumi up because I don't want to run out of time because I want to have fun. But I'm learning a lot here, so this is actually really cool. All right, so now it says, okay, we are going to, so it's 3 create, 3 unchanged. I'm a little bit confused here. I wish that the preview would actually show the stuff that's unchanged also, that it would actually say, because I'm like, hey, what happened to my cluster? And it turns out that the cluster is still there. It's just that, and then the other, and then I want to look at the code real quick. And then as we go through and we use cluster provider is going to depend on kubeconfig, and kubeconfig is going to depend on this stuff resolving. So it automatically knows that, hey, I can't, until I have my kubeconfig, I can't go through and really use the cluster provider. But okay, so this actually comes into building the whole graph. I'm just trying to build a model here. But this is sort of an ownership graph, not an execution graph. So, something would expect me to see the namespace being nested under the cluster because it depends on the cluster. So there's really sort of an access of ownership and there's an access of execution order. And I think that the hierarchy here is a little bit confusing to me there. Let's see. Joe says, also note many folks will split up their stacks into finer grained things, so maybe a different set of folks work on the IAM and then other folks work on the services. Okay, there's a details option in Pulumi's up. Okay, so let's do Pulumi details, is that it? Is it diff or details? Show same, show config, probably show sames. Okay, that shows me everything then. All right, cool. So we're going to go through and we're going to launch this puppy. And so now it's actually talking. Okay, we got that. And so the service, okay, attempting to allocate IP address to service. All right, so I think what's happening here is this is not Pulumi doing this. This is Pulumi actually talking to the Kubernetes cluster and waiting for the Kubernetes cluster to do the things that it needs to do. So one of the things that we've had a hard time with Kubernetes is you want to say, hey, create this thing and then wait for it until it's done. And it turns out that waiting until it's done is actually a really fuzzy concept here, because there's a chance that like when I'm creating stuff, it may take a long time to come up. If I launch a job, does done mean that the job is up and running, a Kubernetes job, or does done mean that the job is actually done? So those are some of the sort of trade-offs that I think folks have to make here. Okay, so what we see here is now we have the deployment name, which has been unified. So all these things have been unified, and now I have an IP address. And now if we all go to that IP address, and you can all feel free, you'll see that we now have QuarD up and running here with the name of the, so we actually have, so the this would be the deployment name here, and then this is the name of the replica set and the name of the pod. So we have like a whole host of unified things here. One of the things we got to worry is that there is a limit to how long a pod name can get. And so I think it's like 32 or 64 characters. And as you start doing this stuff, it ends up expanding past. Okay. So I'm sure this is something that the Pulumi folks have had to deal with. When Pulumi and not Kubernetes Terraform provider, greetings from Amsterdam. Yeah, I'm not sure, Luis, what you're asking there. All right, so we got that up and running. Cool. We've launched something. That's always fun. Let's go back to our tutorial because we're skipping around here a little bit. So we accessed it using kube control, and then experimentation, running off-the-shelf guestbook YAML. Oh, and I want to experiment on something else. Okay, we got about 20 minutes left. Let's see if we can do this. What I have here, Joe and Alex and Pulumi crew, is I have 2 clusters. And what I want to do is I want to be able to I have my GKE cluster, right? And so I'm going to call this one GKE, or no, I have my kubeconfig, my cluster provider. So this is going to be GKE cluster provider, right? And now I want to do const AWS cluster provider equals new k8s.provider. We're going to call this, I don't think I need a unique name there, do I? I don't know. Let's see what happens. And then kubeconfig. And now I have to now we're going to start doing some Google searching. Node load file from disk. Stack Overflow to the rescue. I don't want to do it. All right, how's this working? Can you all see me now? I think OBS crapped out on me. I'm not sure what happened. Sometimes it gets in a wacky state and it stops sending data. Can you hear me? Yes, back. I'm sorry about that. How long was I dead? Because I was talking to myself. All right, so we are back. All right, so how long? All right, so I'm going to go through and read the things here. Details. Okay, we don't render the children graph because that's hard to do in the CLI. You can set things. I'm going back through the comments here, folks. Then we'll when Pulumi and K. So there's a bunch of code gen going in it. Pulumi implements. Okay, so a bunch of things that Pulumi does differently. Yeah, Mike is saying that I'm going to need to do this. All right, so here's what I'm going to try and do now, and we'll see if we can get this done, is I want to, I have 2 clusters, and what I want to do is with one Pulumi program, I want to be able to actually deploy this to both clusters. And so what I have here is I have the GKE cluster and the AWS cluster, and I need to do, let's see, import star as fs from fs, I believe. Is that going to work? And so now, so it says this is type buffer is not assignable, but from string. Oh, how do I convert a, can you hear me? Yes, no? Yeah, so I know, Mike, I'm going to have to do, okay, I need a toString. Okay, so you can hear me. Is this dot toString? There we go. Okay. So boom. All right. So we now have 2 clusters here. And what I want to do is I want to do something where like I loop over these things and I'm doing both of these things. And so I want to do let clusters equal GKE. And then, okay, and you guys are, you all are going to have to help me with my JavaScript here because or TypeScript, because I am such a noob here. Loop over array TypeScript. This is where I'm at. For of, okay. For let, and we called it cluster provider of, this syntax just does not flow for me. Clusters. I want to do this. And now, because I'm trying to show the power here, the power of this fully operational. So now the problem here is the export. Oh, so, okay, so because you can't export within a loop. Alex says I should use const there. So what we're going to actually do here is I'm going to do let namespaces equals let Can I do that? Does that work? Can it be non-const? Deployments. There we go. Export, let's services. What happens if I export? This is going to be interesting. Export, let service addresses equal. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go through and we're going to do, how do I append array TypeScript? Push? Is it just push? Sure, we'll do that. So we're going to do namespaces.push. All right, so I'm getting a red squiggly here. Why am I getting a red squiggly? Items never. It's because there's like types or something. Am I doing some typing weirdness? All right, we're going to do namespaces.push. So it's mad at me here. That's a Pulumi output string. Is not a simul parameter of never. So how do I I need some TypeScript help here. So deployments.push. And okay, I have to do any on that. Okay, so let's go through and these have to be any. Is that right? Oh, I see. I have to, okay. Like that. Me being a TypeScript noob. Okay, so now I go through And I have services, and then the last thing I need here is service addresses. Now, here's another thing that I think is interesting is and I think this is going to be complicated, is that with AWS, it's called service. It's called okay, service status apply ingress0.ip. With AWS, it's going to be hostname. And so what I want to actually do, okay, Alex says, I'll have to give each of these things its own unique name. Deployments, its unique name. Okay. So I can't use name here. Right? And so we're gonna, okay. Can I do like, I need the name. So, okay, okay. I'm totally hacking this. This is not how I would do it, but I'm going to do I++, and then I need to do that local equal name plus I. Does that work? Everyone's called name. All right. Okay, so what we're saying here is let prefixes equal this. Okay, so then can I iterate over both of them? Let's do that because I like that better. Right, so I like that because I don't want to have to recreate stuff. And then, but then I need to actually sort of do a dual loop over the thing. All right, so we're going to have to figure out how do I actually sort of Typescript loop over two arrays at once. Let's see, I can do an index type of thing, blah, blah, blah. This is one. He has 6. Let's see if we can steal some. Nope, 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 nope. All right, I'm tired of this. Int and index, yeah. So I think we're gonna bail on the prefixes here. It's gonna actually recreate some stuff. I'm gonna be interested to see if it deletes the old stuff, because it should know about the old stuff in the state file and know that it should delete it. And then the question is, okay, so then the next question here is that apply S to, and I want to do like or s dot load balancer dot ingress 0 dot hostname. And I think maybe, yes, Pat, so just use the int and index. Okay. All right, so let's just see. So like, I think, all right, duplicate URN. Oh, this is fascinating. Okay, what did I hit here? Hello world, try and give it a unique name. Oh, I see. Okay, so the problem is that when I did this, I used name here too. So I'm going to use AWS plus her name plus AWS. Okay, so this is fascinating. Okay, so we now have this new provider that's a synthetic object called Hello World AWS, and it knows that we're going to be creating, oh, what did I just do there? And it knows that I'm going to be creating Hello World 1 and Hello World 0 across these two different things. We don't actually, if I had the like nice prefixing, it would actually work better. And then the old Hello World, because it doesn't have the 0 and 1, we're going to actually be forgetting it. So we're going to delete 3 and create 7 objects. Let's see what's happening here. All right, so now if I go through, and well, this is actually doing its thing. If I go through and I do, and if I set up a kube config for my AWS one, kube control get nodes, get namespaces. Here we see have Hello World 1 that's creating. And we do n. We actually have Hello World running there. So sweet. All right, and here, okay, so this is fascinating. So now with the output, if I output an array, I see both of them. And here's and it recreated the service. So here is the AWS one that got recreated. I mean the GCP one, and then here's the AWS one. And it takes AWS a while for it to get its shit together for ELB, because ELBs are expensive to bring up. But I assume that at some point this will actually be up and working. This is one of the interesting things is that just because the cloud control plane says I created this thing doesn't mean it's fully configured. This is a sort of a great example of sort of eventually consistent. All right, so this is, I think, really cool, and I think, we've been about an hour and a half in, so I think this is a great example. I think we're showing off sort of how you can both create cloud resources like the GKE cluster, and you can go ahead and operate with those things with Kubernetes. And we can also go through and use programming concepts like loops to operate across multiple clusters in multiple clouds. So I think it's really cool here that I'm able to actually sort of apply the same thing with one program in Pulumi with one configuration across clouds without having to actually sort of copy and paste stuff between these two. So I think that's a really cool thing. And hopefully, Pulumi folks, you didn't mind me going a little bit too off script here. But I'm really fun stuff. I think the and I did want to call out that I want to look real quick before I sign off here that there is a way to run off-the-shelf YAML, because there's this Kate's YAML config file where essentially you're saying, hey, I just want to load some random YAML, and then I can do some transforms, which means that I want to go through and muck with it, and I can sort of create a bunch of resources from that. And this YAML may have multiple objects in it, so this transformations, I assume, get applied to every object that we see come through. This is, I think, a really, really powerful pattern, and this is one of the lessons that I think we learned from KSonnet, is that for a lot of folks, they're going to have pre-existing investments with YAML, and so the fascinating thing is like, how do you start adding value in an incremental way? Because I think one of the things is that what we don't want, is to say, hey, you have a bunch of YAML, but now you have to go through and write a bunch of TypeScript before you can get sort of, that first hit of making progress with this. I really like the idea of being able to mix and match these things and have the YAML and the program that works with that YAML co-evolve. And like I said, I think if we were going to do KSonnet over again, I would have definitely, and I think this is one of those things that's really successful about Kustomize, and we haven't done an episode on Kustomize yet, is the fact that Kustomize takes the YAML that folks are already learning as part of their sort of getting to know Kubernetes experience, and then augmenting that versus saying, here's a whole new thing that you have to learn. So I think this is really an important part of the story here. And we didn't explore it because I thought it was more fun to actually start using some of the TypeScript to program and really bring in some real programming. And like you can see, like, I'm doing things like, reading a file using the Node.fs library, right? So you're bringing in real programming languages here to do this stuff. And I think that's super, super cool. So, all right. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to sign off now. And thank you so much for the Pulumi folks for joining in. And that the tutorial that we went through, I think they, I know Joe and team stayed up late last night actually pulling this stuff together, which was really cool. They sent me some other stuff that you can explore. That's going to be in the show notes. It's in the HackMD. And so Alex is like, a lot of the Pulumi bits look like, what if we did case on it again? Because, well, we kind of did. So that's, there's definitely, and we're all learning from each other too. I think like I look at Kustomize and I'm like, there's a lot that I think people get there. I look at Helm and I think the strength of Helm, and I think this is one of those things that's in that Argo blog post that I mentioned in the beginning. The strength of Helm is the fact that they have this sort of store where you can go and actually say, I want to bring up MySQL, boom, that config is already there. And so, we're all learning from each other as we do these things. So it's really, really fascinating. So yeah, thank you, everybody. Next week, it's going to be Duffy. He's going to be digging into secrets. Hopefully, I'm going to survive the storm. I'll give you all one last look out my window here. You can see that but my mailman mail person is down there actually delivering the mail. So, that's not stopping the U.S. mail service. So yeah, thank you all, and we'll see you next week. And I'm gonna go ahead and sign off. And thank you for everybody for joining me. Have a nice weekend. If your weekend hasn't already started, start it now. All right, talk to you later.